Olafsson, Iceland GM, playing against Fischer. This is Zurich tournament, 1959. Fischer's age was 15 and now he is playing King's Indian defense. C4, knight f6, knight c3, g6, d4, bishop g7, e4, d6, knight f3, Fischer castles, bishop e2, e5, d5, knight b d7, bishop g5. The idea is to prevent knight e8 and thereby the subsequent f5, h6, bishop h4, a6. This slow system has never been refuted, but better is g5, knight d2, queen e8. The idea is to free the knight, thus make it possible for f5. He is talking about this. Queen may support b5, particularly if white castles long. g4, risky, commits white queenside castling. Knight h7, queen c2, knight g5, intending knight h3, then knight f4. White's simple reply brands a mistaken idea. Correct is knight c5, then castle, and if b4 leaves white a shaky game, f5 will be better. And let us go back and see what happens in the game. h3. This is what Fischer was talking about. If now knight into h3 is not possible. Knight c5. Castles on queen side. Bishop d7. Weak is now f5. Bishop into g5. Let us see what happens. Instead of bishop d7, that place f5. Bishop into g5, h into g5, g into f5, g into f5, rook d g1, etc. Let us go back and see what happens in the game. After bishop d7, f3, knight a4, if b5, let us see. Instead of knight a4, b5, b4, knight b7 may not be too bad. Let us see what happens in the game. After f3, knight rook, knight a4 is played. Knight into a4, bishop into a4, b3, bishop goes back to d7, bishop f2, c5, h4. Black's game springs to life after d into e6. We see. Instead of h4, if d into h6, enpassment is played. B into c6, knight b1, d5, or knight b1, d5, c into d5, c into d5, rook into pawn, bishop c6, etc. Let us go back. After c5, h4 is played. Knight h2, bishop e3, b5, knight b1. Knight b1 intending queen e2. But correct is bishop d3. Instead of bishop d3, if h5, knight g5, maintaining the bind by restraining f5. Let us go back. After c5, h4 is played, knight h7, bishop e3, b5, knight b1. f5 is a good move. Ready or not, we have come to this place. And Olafsson was sure that his break was impossible, or he could not have allowed it. G into f5, G into f5, E into f5 to prevent f4, which would seal the king side and neutralize white's attack. Bishop into f5, queen d2. This is the position white played for. e4. Then the game turns on this shot. If rook f6, if rook f6, or h5 cedes the initiative. Rook dg1. Instead of rook dg1, bishop into h6 loses to e3. It is this one. Bishop into if bishop into e3, if queen into e3, bishop into b1, king into b1, queen g6 check, wins a piece. Rook d g1 is played. E into f3. A mistake. Correct is rook a7, and if bishop into h6, transposing into the game. Let us go back and see. After rook dg1, e into f3 is played. Bishop into, if rook into g7 check, if rook into g7 check, king into g7, bishop into h6 check, king h8, bishop into f8, queen into f8, bishop into f3, bishop into b1, and black is winning. So let us go back and see. So what is played is bishop into pawn is played. After e into f3, bishop into pawn is played. Rook a7. It's an excellent move. Olafsson later admitted that he underestimated the strength of this defensive move. Bishop into bishop, rook into bishop, rook into g7, king into g7, bishop d3. Black's f1 become dangerous now, but not bishop into f3. Let us go back and see what happens if bishop into f3. If bishop into f3, queen c3 check, queen e5, queen into pawn, bishop into b1, queen g4 check, bishop g6. So this extra piece wins. So let us go back and see. Bishop is played a rook into g7, rook into g7, king into g7, bishop d3. Now the black pawn becomes dangerous, but not bishop into f3. We'll see. Not bishop into f3. Bishop into b1, king into b1, rook into f3, queen g2 check, queen g6 check. This is the saving class. Otherwise black will lose this. Black has an extra piece, and the pawn on m3 becomes a the pawn on f3 has a divine protection. So let us go back and see. The last move played by white is bishop d3. Let us go back and see. E into f3. After E into f3, bishop into f6 is played. Rook a7 is played. After the game, Olafsson admitted that he underestimated the strength of this defensive move. Bishop into bishop, rook into bishop, rook into rook check, king into rook, bishop d3. Black's pawn becomes dangerous, but not bishop into f3 or queen c3 check, queen e5, queen into f3, bishop into b1, queen g4 check, bishop g6, etc. Pawn into pawn, rook g1 check, king h8, queen b3 check, queen into queen check, pawn into queen, bishop into bishop, rook into bishop, pawn into pawn, knight f6, knight d2, f2. White must keep the f1 square for the knight. e4, king d1, e3, knight f1, rook e5, knight h5, king f3, e2, and white resigns.